Hey YouTube, welcome back to what's probably going to be our last sleepers video of this off season. We're very excited to do this. The past few videos we feel like have been a bit boring, just going over the motions, talking about players we've talked about, and we're excited to get back to doing something that we love, finding players we haven't talked about yet and getting in depth on these guys. And so that's what we're going to do. We're each going to do 4 sleepers apiece. Before we get started, I wanted to talk about we're running 2 16-team community leagues with you guys. Going to have some fun competing against you. But we have 5 spots still open. If you haven't accepted your request, make sure you accept that. And if you haven't left us your email, if you want to be in the league and you're not in right now, drop your email in the comments down below and we'll make sure to include you, of course, until we run out of spots. Again, we have 5 more. But let's just get right into it. As I always say, there's no sense in wasting time. Rob, let's just define what a sleeper is and get a little clarification before we start.
Yeah, sleeper videos are fun to do. One, it's just fun to talk about obscure players. But I think it's very important. We talked about how you're going to win your league. You're going to have to take chances, and sleepers are a way to take some chances in there to find that guy. Inevitably, no matter how good of a draft you have, you're going to have some setbacks. You're going to have bye weeks. You're going to have injuries. You're going to have guys underperform, and so sleepers can help you kind of fill in some of those gaps. Now, what is a sleeper? If I were to talk to 10 different owners and say, hey, tell me what your definition of a sleeper is, it would vary. But here's kind of a loose term that we use to define a sleeper. Okay, a sleeper is a term used during the draft where a lot of fantasy owners or managers believe that a player is going to have a breakout season or a productive year. The word sleeper comes from the idea that the other owner is going to sleep on him or overlook his potential. Now, a sleeper is a guy that you can target later in the draft, somebody who's going to be uncontested. And like for me, a lot of my leagues, I'll wait to the very end to take a bunch of really obscure players at the very end of the draft. Now, there are varying degrees of sleepers, from some that are so obvious that they really shouldn't be considered sleepers, to really obscure to the point when they're not even realistically going to be productive. And I'll give you an example of that. One site we saw earlier this year had Davante Adams as a sleeper. Let's be honest, he's not a sleeper. It's like calling Todd Gurley a sleeper. That's ridiculous to say that. But then last year, for example, we talked about Rico Gathers in a sleeper video, and he was a guy that we knew had some potential. He's fun to talk about, but we all knew that realistically, this is a guy that's probably not going to have any fantasy impact. And so we want to find that middle ground. We're not talking about obvious players, but we're not so obscure that these are guys that you don't need to keep track. We want guys that you should really keep an eye on there. Now, what determines if a guy's a sleeper and if you should grab him and stash him on your bench will determine based on a lot of factors. One, your league size. Your bench size, your scoring, all that will determine that. If you're in a 16-team league, what defines a sleeper is a lot different than if you're in an 8-team league. And so you have to take all that into account. But before we get into the video, you're going to make an example of why we need to stay away from what I would call the Rico Gathers mistake when it comes to sleepers.
Yeah, we're going to talk about a lot of guys in this video who are deep sleepers. Guys who honestly won't be on my bench and I'm just going to watch in free agency for a while. Now, the majority of people don't have enough of an emphasis on sleepers. They just go into a draft and they pick some guys and then boom. So I want to make that clear. But there are some people who, have been watching fantasy videos since March and they've been doing all their research. And some people get a little bit in depth and they're constantly looking for a deep sleeper, which is great. But I've seen people waste a bench spot on a guy like Rico Gathers who simply didn't have any fantasy value. Some big news needs to happen, some major change needs to occur before he'll have fantasy value, and yet I've seen people who are desperately looking to hit the next home run and get the next Odell Beckham waste a bench spot on him. Who would you rather have, Rico Gathers or Tevin Coleman? Tevin Coleman's a guy who is, one injury to Devonta Freeman away from being an elite fantasy running back. He's a guy who's been very dominant for years. Whenever Devonta Freeman's gone, he plays very well. In fact, in the last 2 seasons, despite being the second back and missing 4 games due to injury, he's still placed in the top 22 in fantasy running backs. So of course you do have to take him early. He's not a guy you can get late. I'm not even calling him a sleeper, but I have just he's this guy with upside. We talk about the importance of trying to hit a home run on Todd Gurley. For every guy who comes out of nowhere to finish first at a position in fantasy, it's a lot of guys who come from just middle of the pack. And so don't waste a bench spot on a guy because you're trying to impress your friends by scraping the bottom of the barrel and finding some talent. And I just wanted to mention that because there are a lot of guys in this list we're going to mention that have value, but they're not going to be on my team. I'm not going to draft them. I'm just going to watch and see and wait till something changes.
Yeah, you draft a sleeper guy, you put him on your bench. Your first week, too, for example, let's say you draft a wide receiver in week one, he's on the field for maybe 15 plays. A few of that was special teams, he doesn't see any targets or maybe has one target. Doesn't mean you got to drop him, but week two, you say the same pattern. There's probably time to drop that guy and put somebody more productive on your bench and then maybe keep an eye on him. Maybe something develops a few weeks later and then becomes a viable option. But let's get into our first sleeper if you have nothing else you want to cover
Yeah,
there.
let's just get into it.
So my first sleeper I want to look at is Chris Warren, the third running back for the Oakland Raiders. Now he's actually the son of Pro Bowl Chris Warren, who played for Seattle Seahawks and had some very nice years there. And now, if you look at going back to his father when he played in the NFL, once again, he was a very productive Pro Bowler. He had 4 seasons over 1,000 yards. He had 1 year where he had 11 touchdowns. And Chris Warren, his father, had 1 year where he had 16 TDs. So Chris Warren, the third, really comes from a good pedigree right there. I like that a little bit. Now you look at him, he really meets the definition of a sleeper. His average draft position, he's not even being drafted in the top 100 running backs at this point. So he's really definitely falls in that category of a sleeper now. He's really changed that battle for the number 3 spot there in Oakland if you look at the running back position. Now, the first game he came out against the Lions, he had a big game. He had 13 carries, 86 yards, 6.6 yards per carry. And he followed that up against the Rams. He had 18 carries, 110 yards, 1 touchdown, and 6.1 yards per carry. And so he's had 2 very, very productive preseason games. He's a big physical back, 6'2", 246. He's big, physical, powerful. He's really what you want to see in the NFL as far as a back goes. Now, he went undrafted in the draft this year. And the reason why is he ran a 4.69 40-yard dash, and for a lot of people, that was just a little bit too slow, especially when you consider his senior year, he actually was tight end. Now, when he played for the University of Texas there, the Longhorns, he had 5.6 yards a carry, 13 TDs in 3 seasons for the Longhorns. And as a senior, they moved him from running back to tight end. Now, what he said is, when I enter the NFL draft, I'm going to enter the NFL draft as a running back. He felt like that's where he could be productive. Now, he does have some people he has to leapfrog in order to be significant. For example, he's got Marshawn Lynch. This is Marshawn Lynch's team right now, unless he gets injured or is extremely unproductive. Now, you look back to Marshawn Lynch last year, he actually got stronger as the year went on. He started off, he'd sat out an entire year, and I think it took a while for him to kind of get back into playing shape, to get back in the groove. The first 5 games, Marshawn Lynch had a yards per carry of 3.4, but his last 10, he had a yards per carry of 4.65. You also look in the team there, you've got Martin. I'm not too worried about Martin there. Doug Martin struggled the last few years. Then you got Richard and Washington there. So those are some of the guys he has to leapfrog. When I look at Richard and Washington, I'm not really worried about that because I don't think they're competing against one another. Richard and Washington, their size and skill set, they're really going to have a different role in that offense. So the guy that he's really going to have to compete against at this point is going to be Marshawn Lynch. And I'm not going to say that he's going to take over Lynch at this point. Certainly that's not going to happen. But I think he's a guy, one, barring injuries or maybe if he continues to be productive, or definitely a guy, if you're in dynasty leagues, that has some appeal for 2019. Maybe somebody that you want to stash late in the season. Now, he didn't have an amazing college career, right? Look at his numbers. He didn't kill it there. So I think that many people assume there's no way that he becomes a truly effective NFL player, or nonetheless, he's going to not become a viable fantasy option, right? So he wasn't productive in college. Yeah, maybe he can make the roster. Maybe he can get some action out there. Maybe get a few carries. But this is not a guy that can actually become a viable NFL running back and a fantasy option. But I want to just give you some food for thought there. And I know you know this game, and we've talked about this guy before. But here's a name I want you to consider, Fred Jackson. Okay, talk about Fred Jackson real quickly there, okay? So Fred Jackson attended Lamar High School in Arlington, Texas. He played football. He was a member of the powerful Lamar Vikings team in the late 1990s. He never started a game in his 2 years in varsity because he was considered too small, 5'8", 160, and he was too slow. He began his senior year as a third-string running back, only when there was an injury to starter Justin Faust, who was headed to Stanford. He was elevated as second-string running back behind Tamikis Walker, who was headed to TCU. Okay. During his senior year, 14 of his classmates were given letters of intent to play college football. He didn't receive any offers. So instead, Wayne Phillips, his junior high football coach, arranged for him and his brother to enroll at Cole College, a Division III school that didn't offer scholarships. So that's kind of where he went, right? Remember Fred Jackson here. So eventually he actually went through college, did some things. He tried out for the Bears, Broncos, Packers. He was still considered too small to play in the NFL. At that point, he'd grown a little bit, 6'1", 195. He went on to play indoor football for Sioux City Bandits, earning $200 a week. And you're in more than that, Christian, mowing some lawns and doing some side work, right?
Right.
He got an additional $50 if they won games. So he played 2 seasons for the Bandits in the National Indoor Football League and the United Indoor Football League. He was invited to training camp for the Bills in 2006 by Bills manager Marv Levy. Now, why did he do that? Well, he was also a Cole College alum himself. So he invites him to camp, probably nice gesture, but let's be honest, Fred Jackson's not going to make the team, right? Well, he went on to make the team, and he made his first career start against the Washington Redskins in 2007. He rushed for 82 yards. He caught 4 passes for 69 yards in the Bills' victory. He became the first Division III running back to start an NFL game since. And you know what other player did it prior to him?
No idea.
Chris Warren, his father.
Isn't that ironic?
Isn't that ironic? So, I don't know, maybe it's serendipitous here. So anyways, it's happened before, okay? Chris Warren was also a guy who was Division III, and then he ended up starting for Philadelphia and so on and so forth. Go back to Fred Jackson. He finishes the Bills' third running back all time behind O.J. Simpson and Thurman Thomas. And so sometimes guys like this just need an opportunity to be successful, and definitely he's a guy that you're not going to consider a running back 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5. He's more like a running back 6 that you're going to stash based on his potential, or maybe not even draft, like you had said. Just keep an eye on this guy. But I like Chris Warren III as a deep sleeper out there.
Absolutely, especially in dynasty leagues. There's really nothing to add to that. But with the age of Marshawn Lynch, that door is only going to open more and more for him to have opportunities as time goes on.
Yeah. Let's get to your guy.
All right, so my first guy is Cordero Patterson, wide receiver for the New England Patriots. Here's a guy who I really like. At the end of last year, there were reports that he was starting to look a little bit more refined as a wide receiver and starting to fit that role a bit better. One of the reasons that he was never a great fantasy wide receiver option was not his athleticism. He was unbelievably athletic, able to help out returning in special teams and play a lot of different roles, but they were just saying he wasn't running great routes and he wasn't a very refined wideout. But towards the end of last year, there were a couple of reports that he was getting a bit better at that. His routes were looking a little bit sharper. He was still looking just as quick. His hands were getting a bit better. It wasn't quite translating to on-the-field performance, but that was always good news. And so this offseason, when he went to New England, I think that became very good news. Right now, he's the third wide receiver on the depth chart behind Hogan and Edelman. Now, Edelman has a 4-game suspension, and Hogan is honestly not that great. If you look at the Patriots wide receiving core, one thing that I like about Cordero Patterson as a sleeper is there is certainly room for him to take a job. I mean, Edelman is the best receiving option, or is the best wide receiver on that team right now, and he's not fantastic, to be honest. He's not amazingly impressive, mostly just a possession guy, a PPR specialist. And again, who's going to miss 4 games? And then Chris Hogan's kind of a fast, deep route guy. Again, I want to emphasize the fact that New England uses players very well. I love that Cordell Patterson is able to be productive in special teams. In New England, it's very different than a lot of other systems. For most teams, I would say I want him staying away from special teams. But when you play for Bill Belichick, anything you can do to impress the coaches is huge. And I think that that's very good news for Patterson. Again, he's third on the depth chart, could easily move up. So one thing I was kind of left wondering, and I was just looking, what we need to see some stats from him. Well, he goes out the first preseason game, gets 2 catches for 38 yards, and he looked good. They were good catches against good players. And then comes out the second game, because 2 catches for 38 yards is okay, but it's really not great. Comes out the second game, gets 4 catches for 51 yards and a touchdown. Looked very impressive, fit that offense well. Reports are that he's learned the offense well and has even been taking some first-team reps with Tom Brady and the rest of the starters. So that's all very great news. Again, don't reach on him, but I really like him as a deep sleeper, a guy that I'm watching who could have value, especially later in the season.
Yeah, the question with this guy has never been talent. He's big, physical, he's fast. Go back to when he played for the Vikings. Also, if you're in a league, that added bonus where you could also get kick return yardage, or if you get touchdowns, that helps. He's going to be using kick returns. This guy's got a ton of talent. Just need to bring it all together, and maybe this is finally it for him. And if he did, he's a guy that could have a breakout season. So,
well, I mean, this is the perfect system for him when you look at it. The New England Patriots, this is exactly the sort of player they like, a guy who can do a job and they can teach him. I feel like they're always pulling players who are underrated and turning them into good stars. In fact, just last night I watched a video. It was top 10 crappy players the Patriots made look great, which was really funny. But it's interesting to remind you just how many people played super well for them, and then after leaving that system were not good. And a lot of them were wide receivers, actually.
I don't know why I'm sitting here. I've been picking on the Cleveland Browns lately, but like the yin and the yang, the opposite. They take great players and make them good, and we should do a contrast video where great players that the Browns have destroyed.
I like that. Well, who's your next guy? Let's talk about him.
Tywan Taylor, wide receiver for the Titans. His average draft position is 88 for wide receivers taken. Last preseason, he looked dominant. He looked explosive. And then in this preseason, he just had a game where he had 4 catches, 95 yards, and 2 TDs. He had a beautiful quick screen he took from Marcus Mariota, turned into a 47-yard touchdown, and he just blew by the secondary. He was very fast there. He had another touchdown, finished with 95 yards. He's mostly a slot receiver. And he's really a nice asset to an offense that we think is going to improve. Right now, Marcus Mariota looks like he's back on track. Marcus' first 2 years looked very good, improving, and then last year he took a step back, but it looks like that offense is back on track. Now, a lot of people have talked about him, but as of lately, he's starting to make some noise. Now, if you go back to the combine, there's some things that he did that were interesting. One of the things he did is he led the combine in top performer and 3-cone drill for the broad jump area there for that category, and just shows his quickness and just how explosive that he is. Now, let's go back to college. So back in 2016 in college, he really found his skills quickly against Alabama. He was playing them, and in that game against Alabama, he had caught 9 passes for 121 yards against the Tide's talented secondary. That's a good team to do that against. They're loaded with talent, obviously, They really got the attention of a lot of scouts. He had a great senior overall. He has first-team all-conference notice after catching 98 passes, 1,730 yards, and 17 scores. He had similar years in 2015. He had first-team all-conference. He had 86 receptions, 1,467 yards, and 17 touchdowns there. Guy's got great hands. He wears 2X gloves. Big hands is important in the NFL to be able to do that. Now the guy, he was great on some kick returns there. Now coming out of the combine, as they begin to evaluate who he is and who he compares him to, a lot of times what I like to do is find an NFL player and say, okay, this is who we see him as far as the skill level and where he's at. And he was drawing comparisons to Stephon Diggs. And I think that's a pretty good comparison to make. That's a guy that's also got a lot of talent, very young, talented wide receiver there. Here's his combine evaluation. This is some of the things they talked about in come out of the combine. He's a slot receiver with athleticism, and he's got separation quickness to win the NFL level. He benefits statistically from Western Kentucky's scheme, but that offense also benefited from his ability to get open and his explosiveness in open field. He's got a high floor with potential above average slot receiver and an offense that recognizes his flexibility. So this is, we can maybe starting to hear this guy now. He might be new for us, but this is a guy that made a lot of noise in college. He was a guy that did well at the combine. This guy's got a lot of potential. He's been very impressive in Titans camp all year. Now, some people would say, well, you know what? This is Corey Davis's team here. He's a guy that we've talked a lot about. Other people have. They like Corey Davis. Don't worry about it. He's not competing with Corey Davis. Corey Davis is a big physical possession receiver. This guy's a slot receiver, so it's not like he's going to elude targets from one another. They're not going to steal time on the field. In fact, I think they're a nice complement to one another. What that does, guys he is competing with, though, is Rashard Matthews and Tajay Sharp. Neither one of those guys are dominant in the sense that neither one of those guys are so good that they're what I would call wide receiver locks to start there. And so I think he's got an ability to really move up that depth chart and get an honest look to become the number 2 guy in the team there. Once again, he's not a guy that I would trust as a wide receiver 1, 2, 3, or probably even 4, but as a wide receiver 5 or 6 on your bench, as somebody you could watch, definitely somebody you got to keep your eye on.
Exactly. I think the idea of trying to compare him or say that he's competing against Corey Davis is just dumb. Guys, there's room for 2 receivers on almost every team in the NFL. So I like him. Very athletic. I love the comparison to Stephon Diggs because of Corey Davis. Corey Davis is the possession receiver, and what's the perfect complement to a possession receiver? A playmaker. And so maybe Tywan Taylor comes out this year and becomes the playmaker, helps those chains move. Anyways, I really agree with that pick. I really like it. But let me talk about my next guy. All right, so now I'm going to talk about wide receiver Sheldon Gibson. And here's the thing, guys. We've talked about a lot of receivers for this video, and maybe that's just because there's a lot of depth at wide receiver, something we push all the time. A lot of the guys I'm going to talk about, I talk about Cordell Patterson. A lot of my guys, opportunity is key in fantasy, and Sheldon Gibson does not have great opportunity right now, I'll be honest. Zach Ertz is there, that Dallas Goedert is there, the tight end, his backup was pretty good, Alshon Jeffrey, Mike Wallace, Nelson Aguilar, even Corey Clement out of the backfield. There's so many weapons there. So why am I going to talk about Sheldon Gibson? And here's why. He has impressed me and surprised me more than any other player this offseason. He has been phenomenal. In game 1, he had 3 targets, pulled in 2 catches for 77 yards and a touchdown. In game 2, he had 6 targets, pulled in 5 catches, 90 yards, and a touchdown. Like I said, no one has been more impressive and more surprising and shocking this offseason than Gibson. He is buried on the depth chart. I totally understand that. And so there's a reason that I'm not ranking him super high. There's a reason I would qualify him as a deep sleeper, as a dynasty league watch guy, as somebody just to keep an eye on. He's not going to make it on any of my rosters. I'm not going to draft him unless I'm in a really deep 16 team league. But don't overlook that because he's buried on the depth chart. Who do you think last year? Can you think of any players who started the season buried on the depth chart but turned out to be a fantastic fantasy option?
Well, obviously you got some on the top of your mind there, so
Alvin Kamara.
yeah.
I mean, he started the season behind Adrian Peterson and Mark Ingram, and he was kind of the third guy on a team that was supposed to be mainly passing the ball and wasn't always very effective. And Mark Ingram still managed to have like 58 catches last year. And sometimes talent just wins out. I think it's going to take a while for it to win out, but Alshon Jeffrey's had some health issues, I believe, so has Aguilar. There could very well be an opportunity where one guy gets hurt and it gives him his opportunity to play, his opportunity to step up. Maybe a player gets traded. Again, because he's so buried on the depth chart, I'm not going to tell you should draft him, guys. Has no value right now because I don't think he's going to see the field. But when he does see the field, maybe at the end of this year or next year or 2 years from now, I promise you he's going to be phenomenal. He has been extremely impressive this year.
Well, you talked about opportunity, and you're right. I mean, look at that roster. You look at the depth chart right there. He's way down. He's buried on that depth chart. With that said, though, like you had mentioned, Alshon Jeffrey might start the year on the PUP list, which means he'll miss 6 games. And Nelson Aguilar's been beat up. And so, depending upon how those guys recover from the injuries, he could go from a guy that's buried on that depth chart to being a starter week 1. So, I certainly wouldn't bet on it right now, but you got to watch it.
Well, that's the other thing you talk about. Aguilar has been good, but he hasn't been fantastic. He's no lock to be a starting wideout, and neither is Mike Wallace. Heck, even the Baltimore Ravens, who had him in recent years, didn't even want him this year. He's bounced around from team to team and even said recently that he has had a lot of regrets in his career about the way that he's done things. So, yeah, it is possible that Sheldon Gibson has a starting role. It is a reach. There's a reason I qualify him as a deep sleeper. But he's too talented, and I'm too excited about him not to mention him.
All right. So my next sleeper is Jake Coomer, a wide receiver of the Green Bay Packers. Before I get into why he's a deep sleeper, there's some stories in the NFL, like they're just great stories. Here's a guy that I really hope he makes that team. I'm not a Packers fan. I'm a Vikings fan, obviously. Live in Minnesota, grew up in Minnesota. But if you know what he's went through, how hard he's worked, how he's persevered, I would love for this guy to make it. But here's why he's a deep sleeper. One, he's another guy that's average draft position. He's a 107th wide receiver taken. He's 26 years old. Out of the college he went to is UW-Whitewater. Now, he had a slow start for that college there. They're called the Warhawks. But then his last 2 years playing for them, he had 33 touchdowns, 2,447 yards, very productive years there. He's got great size. He's 6'4". Spent a lot of time in the weight room, is strong, great condition. Now, he's played on practice squads the last few years, could never quite land on a starting roster. And a lot of people, I think, are assuming that, well, if this guy was going to have an impact, if he was going to make an NFL roster, he would have done it already at age 26. You're not young anymore. He's not old. But that's not young anymore in the NFL. And so, obviously, if it was meant to happen, it would have happened there. He would have had some fantasy impact already. But I want to caution there. I want you to remember a few people. One, Hall of Famer Chris Carter of the Minnesota Vikings. Okay, he didn't have his first 1,000-yard season until he was 28. And then another guy that I want to think about staying here in Minnesota, a guy that was really a walk-on, made the practice squad. It took a while for he got in the starting role, playing for Minnesota. Can you think of anybody?
Adam Thielen.
Adam Thielen, who didn't have his first breakout year until he was 26. So, this is a guy that still could definitely do that. He's been making a lot of noise in preseason, but I want to start talking about what the players around him in camp are thinking, especially Aaron Rodgers, because Aaron Rodgers, by the way, he's a tough quarterback to play for. He's very critical of his teammates. Okay, so recently Aaron Rodgers at practice, he came out publicly, which is rare to do that. Normally they try to keep that in-house. But now with Aaron Rodgers, he goes out publicly, lambasted the entire wide receiver, especially the young wide receivers, talked about how terrible they did in practice. But he praised Jake Coomer. Praised how he's always working hard, he's making great plays, he's always prepared. Clinton Dix said of Coomer following Thursday night's 51-34 preseason victory, he's one of our top receivers in the room. You see it. There's no faking it in his game. It's not even Aaron throwing in the ball. He's doing it with the young quarterbacks. Imagine when he gets there with number 12 in the game, what he has a chance to do. They like him. Another guy put on there, cornerback Williams, said this. He's doing great. He's one of the talks of camp, in my opinion. He's been doing it all camp long. It's not just like he's showing up and having fluke games. He's been doing it the whole camp. To see a guy come in here, work that hard, you don't know his name day one, but after day 2 or 3, you're like, man, this guy's pretty good. you start to take notice of him. That's what you want to see out of guys. I think Aaron's expressed how much he's appreciated the way the guy came in and worked. That's the ultimate compliment. The man's got size, speed, runs great routes. This cornerback Williams went on to say, he's dangerous, he's doing great, he's one of the talks of the camp. So the cornerbacks are talking big. Here's what Aaron Rodgers said about him. He's been a fan since the beginning, both in practice. Rodgers has repeatedly connected with him and has been Kumara's favorite. Kumara's had a knack for getting open, and he's made some great plays. I said it before, practice reps are very important. There's many types of defenses and coverages and pressures that you see in practice. He's made plays consistently through those sessions. Rodgers said, but you never know how that's going to turn out in the game. Will that be production? So Aaron Rodgers basically saying he's done well in practice. He's been there. He's working hard. He understands the games. He understands the schemes. He's done anything we ask him. But that doesn't necessarily turn into numbers when it comes to actual games. Okay. Well, let's look at his numbers in the first 2 preseason games so far. So last preseason game, he had 3 catches, 114 yards, and a touchdown. His first preseason game, he had 3 catches, 76 yards, and a touchdown. Now, honestly, right now, he's another guy that's buried on that depth chart. Cobb and Adams, those guys are locked in. They are proven. So this is a guy that's more of a bench stash as a wide receiver 5 or 6. But he's really one injury away from becoming the wide receiver 2 on that team with having Aaron Rodgers being your quarterback. And what you shared in many videos is if you can get into that number 2 role for the Packers, you will produce. You'll be productive. Makes me think of all those years. Anybody that got injured and then end up filling in on Peyton Manning's team, you just picked them up in fantasy because you just knew they'd be productive. And that this could be a case here. Some people assume that he'll make the practice squad for the Packers, maybe not make the roster. I don't believe that because if he goes to the practice squad, his performance has meant that another team's going to grab a hold of this guy. So I think he's going to make the roster there. He's a deep bench stash, somebody to watch, wait. For example, I like this guy. Like I said, he's been fun to watch. He's been a great story in the preseason.
Yeah, absolutely. If I were a wide receiver, I would want to play for Aaron Rodgers. I don't know if there's a better system. You can argue that there's better quarterbacks, but not only is it Aaron Rodgers, but it's just that Green Bay offense that just loves to throw the ball. And another thing is, talk about Randall Cobb is a guy I've been high on all offseason. Randall Cobb is a guy who, as a number 3 receiver, went out and had 800 receiving yards and like 8 touchdowns 1 year as the number 3 guy. Like, I wouldn't say this for any other offense in the NFL. But the number 3 wideout in Green Bay still has value as a fantasy guy. And that's just part of that crazy system that, I don't know, it works for them. And, I mean, he's been so impressive. I don't know the last time I've seen a player in preseason be so impressive as Jake Kumara was.
Yeah, now a lot of people are talking about Geronimo Allison being number 3 guy and some other guys there. And that's certainly right now where it sits. But after Cobb and after Adams, none of those guys have locked in their spots. So
absolutely. Let's get to my next guy. Okay, so now I want to talk about Jerron Brown. He's a guy that I've been very excited about, wide receiver for the Seattle Seahawks. So he played a lot of years for Arizona and was honestly not too impressive, although his last year there he had, I believe, 4 or 5 touchdowns. It was a fairly okay season, but I'm very excited now that he moves. First of all, there were a lot of guys on that list from, Nelson and Fitzgerald and I'm missing one guy, but anyways.
We had 2 Browns there.
Two Browns. That's my problem.
John Brown and Jerron Brown.
John and Jerron, thank you. That's frustrating because I kept thinking it's not Brown. I'm talking about Brown.
There was 2 Browns, yeah.
Yeah, there were a lot of guys there, and David Johnson out of the backfield is going to get his 80 catches, and so he really just didn't get a great opportunity. But now he goes to Seattle, a team kind of similar. We just talked about Green Bay, a team in Seattle that has a bad running game. A great mobile quarterback who can throw the ball, is extremely effective no matter who you give him, and a bad defense, a defense that has much regressed from last year and lost a lot of starters. Of course, we know that Doug Baldwin is the number 1 guy, but the number 2 spot in my mind is very possible Jerron Brown could take that. Tyler Lockett is a guy who we talked about as a sleeper because of the system, because he could be the number 2 guy, probably will, but there's certainly a chance Jerron Brown takes that job, and I'll tell you why. Tyler Lockett couldn't even take that job last year. In fact, he lost it to Paul Richardson, who was the number 2 guy, which maybe tells us that Lockett hasn't been too impressive. We still like Lockett, but as far as a deep sleeper goes, the opportunity is there. I love the type of receiver he is. He's 6'3", 204 pounds. He is exactly the sort of wide receiver that Russell Wilson likes to throw to. That's very similar build to Doug Baldwin, who I believe is like 6'2", 210 pounds in that sort of range. So has he had any productiveness this offseason? Well, first game he only had 1 catch for 9 yards. Really not impressive, guys. It wasn't, and I thought, okay, maybe he's not going to be a good option, but he comes up the second game, has 2 catches for 74 yards. And that was nice to see his big playmaking ability. He's a very fast wide receiver. Again, on an offense, I've been saying it all offseason, this is going to be the Russell Wilson show. How are they going to win this year? Russell Wilson. They don't have a defense. They lost tons of talent there. Their running game is not impressive. We talk about they lost Paul Richardson, and I've talked about this all season, and they lost Jimmy Graham, guys who combined for over 1,500 yards and 16 touchdowns. Jerron Brown could easily slide into a role to help fill that. Again, another guy that I'm going to draft is probably very late in the draft, is one of my last bench spots, and we'll see if he doesn't perform in the first couple of weeks. I'll certainly drop him, but he has high upside. I'm excited to see what he could possibly do.
Yeah, that defense took a major hit in the offseason. They're going to have to score a lot of points. Russell Wilson's a great quarterback. I think there's going to be a lot of numbers go around there. And so I think he's in a great position if he can do the right things to certainly be a sleeper move up and have a significant role there.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of a big basis for that value, is how much they're going to be passing the ball this year.
So my final guy that I'm going to talk about here is Christian Kirk, wide receiver of Arizona. So his average draft position, he's a 77th wide receiver taken, right? He's a guy that I think can have an immediate impact. All the guys I've mentioned, I don't think he's a guy that's way down on the depth chart. I think when the season starts, he could very well be the number 2 guy there. I like this guy a lot. He has shown the skill this preseason. Last game, he had 4 catches, 49 yards, and a touchdown. In the first game that he played, he had a beautiful punt return where he beat everybody. He was fast, quick, cut, good vision, and just missed. He tried to cut to beat the kicker and actually just fell. It's kind of a funny play, but he's looked very talented once again. Looks explosive. According to Darren Urban of the ArizonaCardinals.com, second round wide receiver Christian Kirk has really left an impression on the coach Steve Wilks. He's been a standout throughout camp. Now, when he came here, a lot of people knew that he was going to contribute a lot to special teams, but the 21-year-old has now really put himself in the mix for the starting job at wide receiver there. Cardinals coach Steve Wilks said that Christian Kirk has created separation on the number 2 receiving job. So that's huge. Coach is coming out publicly and saying, hey, you know what? This guy's actually creating some separation, which tells me he's far and ahead as far as the other wide receivers go winning that job. Bryce Butler's been injured. I think it creates an opportunity for him, and I think he's taken great advantage of that. Once again, he had a touchdown last game. It was a beautiful play by both him and the quarterback. Now, he's actually beginning to draw comparisons to Odell Beckham Jr. That's another great name that you want to be compared to in the NFL. And not only that, but you'll find out like his size, his hands, his body. There's a lot of similarities there, his quickness. So the comparison started with the offensive lineman Pugh, who played for the Giants last year, who was signed this offseason with the Cardinals. So he's played with Odell Beckham before. And here's what he said about the second round pick. Yeah, I was very busy blocking. I didn't catch a bit of the replays talking about the touchdown that he made. But he goes on to say he's very impressed with how he gets open and makes plays. Even the punt return that he had and the one before that. Those things stood out for me. He's making an impact in multiple areas of the game. He's a great player to have on your team. Goes on to say in this article, Pugh broke all reasonable protocol and compared Christian Kirk to one of NFL's most electric stars. He reminds me a little bit of another number 13 I used to play with in New York, referring to, of course, Odell Beckham Jr. Sam Bradford, quarterback, said this about him. Seems like he has an extra gear on some games. Went on. He's got some burst. He's got speed. It's really nice to see that. This guy was impressive at the combine if you look at him. So it's not a fluke. This guy didn't come out of nowhere. He came out of college, fairly highly touted, did well at the combine. He cranked out an impressive 20 repetitions at 225 pounds for the bench press. He's 5'10", 211 pounds. Now, he did run a 4.47 40-yard dash. Now, the thing is, a lot of people feel like his side at 5'10" is that tall. But if you look at Odell Beckham's 5'11", and he actually comes in at just over 5'10", so pretty much they're the same height, same build. Played for Texas A&M. He counted for over 3,000 all-purpose yards and 40 touchdowns in his career there. Those are great numbers. 40 touchdowns.
That's a lot.
Yeah. You look at, he led the Aggies with a reception with 80 and 1,009 yards and 8 touchdowns back when he was a senior there. He's a sturdy, physical wide receiver. He's got actually a decent-sized frame, so he can handle the wear and tear, taking some of those hits there. He's got excellent open field agility, toughness with the ball in his hands. He, in 2016, was third-team Associated Press All-American. And he was also what they call a three-way First American All-SEC. And what that refers to is these three things are combined: all-purpose receiver and return specialist, because he can do it all. This guy's great as a wide receiver. He's great on kick returns. He's going to see a lot of action out there on the field. I could get into more numbers in college. I don't think it's that important. Once again, I think that he's got great size as far as physically. He's 5'10", 5'11", 203 pounds, so he can handle some physical wear and tear. He's got great hands, 9 and 7/8 inches. Really, that's big hands. You know who has really big hands in the NFL is known for his great ability to catch, how he uses his hands catching.
Larry Fitzgerald.
Yeah. Another one is the very guy he's being compared to, Odell Beckham, known to have great big physical hands. So anyways, he's a guy. I think that he's got great hands. His ability to get separation, use his body. He can control contact. So he's a great guy that I think is out there. Now, the one thing that is you're reading, I don't even know if this is an insult, but as the article went on, you talked about his combine. If you look at who he was, one of the things it said was a weakness of his coming out of college is that he's quicker than he is fast. Okay. And so basically what they're saying is straight line speed is maybe a little there, like seeing a little more quickness there. But you know, think of another wide receiver who's known coming out of college, he wasn't very fast, but he was known quick, he ran great routes. But he wouldn't have been that impressive in terms of his 40-yard dash time. That was Jerry Rice. And so when it comes right down to it, in a lot of ways, I'd rather take quickness over speed. How many guys have come in the NFL, guys who had just great speed, who hasn't necessarily converted into great wide receivers? I think about Cordell Patterson. Now we'll see, he's still young. Maybe this is the year he does that, but he's got great speed. But there's another guy at the Vikings draft. His name is Troy Williamson. Took him in the first round, 7th overall. This guy had amazing speed, and yet he just couldn't convert that to becoming a great wide receiver in the NFL. And so when it comes right down to it, straight line speed or quickness, I'll take the quickness any day. For this guy to be able to make great routes, cuts, get open, things like that. So he's a guy that I like, not just as a deep sleeper later in the year. This is a guy that I think needs to be owned coming out of every draft right now.
Yeah, I like that. That's a very good pick. All right, so my last guy that I'm going to talk about is Jermaine Kearse. And this is a guy who is being taken 85th as the 85th wide receiver, which basically means in a lot of leagues he's not even being taken at all. And that to me is absolutely absurd. Last year he had 65 catches, 800 yards, and 5 touchdowns. On a team for the Seattle Seahawks where he was competing with Paul Richardson, Tyler Lockett, and Doug Baldwin. He was still able to have those numbers. Now, if he just repeated those numbers, 65 catches, 800 yards, and 5 touchdowns, that on itself puts him as a top 50 wideout. And I very well think that he could do that. Right now, he is the number 2 wide receiver on the Jets depth chart behind Robbie Anderson. Has looked really impressive. Hasn't had a phenomenal preseason, but things that I really like are just the news and the reports coming out about him. For one, multiple coaches have said that he is an integral leader on that team and that he is a huge part of teaching those young guys. And they talked about how well he has carried himself in camp and around those other players, his attitude, his work ethic, and I think that's absolutely huge news. They love him there. But what I really like is how well they say that he's been working with Sam Darnold. They say that Kearse is Sam Darnold's favorite target right now, that they have awesome chemistry. And they've actually been working plenty of one-on-ones in New York Jets camp, which is huge. Sounds like, excuse me right now, Teddy Bridgewater is going to get traded, and that they really like Sam Darnold, who they think has been very impressive this preseason and is going to be the quarterback even from week 1, from the very beginning. Preseason games, a lot of times they've been seen working on some things, talking things through on the sidelines, and I've been very impressed. I wasn't excited to talk about him, but I realized I absolutely had to. He's a bit of an older receiver, but when a guy is going 85th overall, he is far, far better than that. He's a top 50 wideout for sure. A guy who's proven in the past he can get, at least 65 catches, 800 yards, and 5 touchdowns. I wouldn't be surprised this year if he has a much bigger role and is able to far surpass that. He could be a 1,000-yard receiver this year. He really could.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys like him that may not be fun and exciting picks. Maybe they don't have the highest ceiling, but when it comes down to winning your league, it's about getting value picks at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
And while you're loading up on running backs or things like that, where you're really building your team out, this is a guy that could be a solid, safe pick that, once again, is not exciting, but will help you win a championship.
Absolutely, and that's why I talked about him. Not the most exciting pick, but you're looking for talent. There's some talent for you in Jermaine Kearse.
All right. So these are some of our deep sleepers. We did one like a month ago. A lot's changed in the NFL. Games have started, camps have happened, there's injuries, etc. We want to hear after a month and a month later, who are your deep sleepers once again out there? Who are you targeting out there? And going back to what you said at the beginning, if you want to play in our league, leave your name out there. Thanks for joining us today. God bless and take care.